The hostages were held in makeshift camps built by the force public, often just a collection of wooden posts and a mud floor. There were no beds, no food, no mercy. They were tied together in groups under the blazing African sun during the day and shivering through the cold nights. Soldiers guarded them with rifles slung casually over their shoulders. To the soldiers, these hostages weren't people. They were leverage. If the men of the village brought the rubber quota within the deadline, the hostages were sometimes released. But if they didn't, the punishment was absolute. The force public set strict deadlines, sometimes 48 hours, sometimes less. Runners were sent back to the village with a clear message: bring the rubber or your wives and children will die. Men disappeared into the forest, climbing rubber vines, cutting and bleeding the trees for sap. The jungle was merciless. Some returned empty-handed, some didn't return at all. The hostages waited in silence. They knew what failure meant. They had seen it before. When the deadline passed, soldiers assembled the hostages in a clearing. The execution ground was not a formal place. It could be a patch of forest, a riverbank, or the edge of the village anywhere. That fear could be witnessed. Villagers were often forced to attend. Mothers, fathers, children lined up and guarded by armed men. The officer would step forward, pull out a folded paper, and read out loud, "Your village has failed to deliver the rubber quota." Then the soldiers raised their rifles. The first volley was always aimed at the front row of hostages. A single gunshot wasn't meant to just end a life fit, was meant to echo. It echoed through the trees, through the huts, through the minds of everyone who heard it. The people knew, if they resisted, this could be their family next. It wasn't unusual for the soldiers to execute just a few hostages, leaving others alive. That made the fear even stronger. Those who survived became living reminders of the punishment. Historical accounts describe how hostages were often women and children because their deaths struck the deepest. Killing a fighter made a martyr. Killing a mother broke the will of an entire village. In some cases, children were lined up as well. Soldiers would fire their guns in the air or execute one person at random to show they were serious. The message was clear: the rubber must flow or you will lose everything. In colonial archives, ledgers list numbers of hostages, rubber quotas, and bullets used. But nowhere in those records are their names. No name for the woman who begged to hold her child one last time. No name for the child who screamed as rifles fired. No name for the man who watched helplessly as his world disappeared. The executions were not considered crimes. They were part of the system. Some of what we know today comes from the few who dared to write the truth. Missionaries, often stationed in remote areas, witnessed these punishments and documented them in journals. They described entire villages broken without a single battle. One missionary wrote, "I have seen men bring rubber as if carrying the weight of their own souls, and I have seen mothers' eyes." After the soldiers made good on their threats, their testimonies would later reach the outside world, carried in letters and reports smuggled through the colonial network. There were villages that tried to resist, men who tried to ambush soldiers, leaders who said, "No more." But resistance often led to mass executions. The force public would return with machine guns, burn huts, and execute all remaining hostages. Some leaders were publicly hanged or shot in front of their people. Others vanished into the forest, their names remembered only in oral history. The executions of hostages weren't just punishment for failure. They were a weapon to erase courage. Imagine the sound of a jungle at night: frogs, crickets, leaves, rustling, and then a single gunshot. For many in the Congo, that sound wasn't just a gunshot. It was the sound of someone they loved being taken away. After each execution, soldiers often displayed the bodies or paraded survivors back to their villages. The fear was designed to linger, to grow like vines around people's minds. The horror of the Congo Free State wasn't just in the deaths themselves, but in how casual they were. Hostages were taken like stock. Executions were scheduled like deliveries. Lives were counted like kilograms of rubber. And all of this fed a global economy that made Leopold one of the richest monarchs in Europe. By the early 1900s, reports of these atrocities began to spread. Journalists and activists like Edie Morel and Roger Caseman helped expose the cruelty of Leopold's regime to the world. Photos smuggled out showed hostages, executions, and the aftermath of violence. Public outrage grew in Britain, the United States, and parts of Europe. For the first time, Leopold could no longer hide behind the mask of civilization. In 1908, facing mounting pressure, Leopold was forced to relinquish control of the Congo Free State to the Belgian government. But this did not bring justice. No soldiers were tried, no officers were punished, no families received answers for their dead. The hostage executions had already scarred a generation. Each hostage execution was more than just a death. It was a weapon, it controlled villages, it silenced resistance, it turned human lives into messages. These are the stories that history almost buried. But through testimonies, reports, and memory, they speak again. In the Congo Free State, terror was not a storm that came and went. It was a system, and every system leaves behind echoes. Today, those echoes remind us, fear can rule nations, but truth endures.